Hello friends, so today I'll be talking on this 40th update on COVID-19 vaccine. So I'm sure there's a lot of noise on this COVID-19 vaccine. So the disclaimer is I'm not a vaccine specialist, so I'm just going to give a very brief overview of the type of vaccines that have already come and what are to follow the current available vaccines. So it is only a brief overview. So maybe I'll cover this vaccine in 2-3 parts. So this particular narrative will be on the types of vaccine that are being investigated and the types that have come out, and what are the advantages and the limitations of some of them. So when we look at the vaccine, the way vaccine works is the science of vaccine is basically you may have a DNA vaccine, you may have an RNA vaccine, and then you may have a vaccine with proteins which are constituents of the virus. So if we are dealing with the DNA vaccine, so basically the way it works is, so the DNA then transcribes into RNA and then produces protein against which the cells obviously produce antibodies against the proteins. Then you have an RNA virus, so RNA vaccines, so which again will code for the protein, and then your body produces cellular response to the proteins that are that are injected into your individual. Then you have a protein vaccine where there are proteins that constitutes the part of the vaccine, and the cell mounts the response to the protein. So these are the different classes of vaccine that are generally available for any of the pathogen that one may be targeting. So with regards to COVID, so they have tried all these different vaccines, DNA vaccine, RNA vaccine, protein vaccine. So we'll talk about it. But the quintessential part of it is ultimately the immune response that the body or the cells mount is to the protein components of the virus or of a pathogen. And these protein components are the components of either a DNA or an RNA virus. So that is how we should look at it. So then the question arises, why two doses of vaccines are given? So whenever a vaccine is given, the initial response will not be as robust as the second response. So you would have a response, the initial response, which is called as a primary immune response after the first dose. But the type of immune response that is mounted after the second dose is always a much larger response. It is a much bigger response and much more effective response with more number of T helper cells and B memory cells, or all the memory cells will be a lot more robust after the second vaccine. And this is called as immune memory. So basically there will be a smaller first response, and after the second dose the response is more robust, and there are more number of memory cells that are produced, and then they reach a plateau. And the key success of a vaccine is the presence of this immune memory, or memory B cells or memory T cells. So the memory cells are the ones which are extremely important to confer the protection against the virus. So this is what we need to clearly understand, and that is why there are two sort of a doses that is given in any sort of a vaccination. So we'll come to the type of COVID-19 vaccine. So from 1 year there has been a race to come out with different vaccines. When we talk about vaccines in COVID-19, it is called active immunity. So the DNA vaccine, the way it works is, so basically you have a gene which codes for the S protein, which is the spike protein, which is embedded into this plasmid. So this plasmid acts as a carrier, and this DNA gets transcribed to mRNA, and then which further gets translated to S protein. So basically whatever we give, ultimately the response that we expect is to the protein components of the virus. So then this particular RNA is translated to S protein, and the host produces antibodies to the S protein. So predominantly if you see all the vaccines for COVID-19, they are targeted against the spike protein, which is the key element which leads to all the inflammatory damage and which threatens or which determines the virulence of the virus. So this is the way all the viruses are being worked with to come out with an effective vaccine. And Innovia is a company, which is a US company, which is looking at this DNA vaccine, which is working on it. And obviously this vaccine is not out, so it is still in the experimental phase. So now we'll talk about RNA vaccine. So in RNA vaccine, so this RNA, as you see, the RNA is embedded into this lipid nanoparticle. It's called LNP. So basically, the RNA is embedded in this LNP to prevent degradation when it is administered into an individual. Because once it is administered in a naked form, it gets degraded. To protect it, it is encapsulated into this lipid nanoparticle, and once it gets into the body, because of the action of the lipase, this lipid nanoparticle is whatever dissolved, and then you have an mRNA which gets released, and this codes for the spike protein, and your body produces antibodies against the spike protein. So this is how the RNA vaccine works, and the RNA vaccine is a newer technology. And the companies that have worked on this RNA vaccine and brought out is Moderna, which I'm sure all the listeners would be aware of, and the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. So these are the two vaccines which have adopted this technology to coming out with RNA vaccine. And the good thing is it has completed phase 3. So if you today see I'm sure all the listeners would be aware of the current situation. So there are four vaccines which have completed phase 3. So mRNA vaccine is one of them, which is the Moderna and Pfizer. So these constitutes two of the four. The third one would be our Oxford AstraZeneca one, which I'll talk next. And the fourth one is the Russian one, which is Sputnik or Gamaleya, that comes from another company. So this is the RNA vaccine. So the third type of vaccine is viral vector. So this is what in India we call it as Covishield. Covishield is nothing but a vaccine that is conceptualized and originated from Oxford and AstraZeneca collaboration. So in viral vector, what happens is you have a coronavirus. We take the genetic components of this active virus and embed into harmless virus vector. So in this particular Covishield or AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, so this viral genes have been embedded into chimpanzee adenovirus component, and the vaccine has been created. So basically, the whole virus is harmless because it's a chimpanzee adenovirus, but it is embedded with the viral genes of the coronavirus, and then and your body mounts an immune response to this harmless virus, to the genetic components which are embedded into this chimpanzee adenovirus. So the University of Oxford, along with AstraZeneca, have come out with this, which is called Covishield, and which is marketed in India by Serum Institute of India. So these three have collaborated, Oxford, AstraZeneca, and Serum Institute, and come out with Covishield. So I'm sure all the listeners would be aware that Covishield may be out in India anytime, and it is already being administered to a lot of patients in UK. And if we talk about the trial that has come out in December 2020, maybe I'll cover the part of this trial in the next narrative. So this trial was predominantly done in patients from UK and Brazil, and there were a few patients from India, and the phase 3 has been completed in this. So that's why we consider this particular vaccine as a reasonably safe vaccine, because it has completed all the phases of the trial. So phase 3 is completed. So the previous slide, the Moderna and the Pfizer has completed phase 3, and this particular also has been completed for phase 3, and the results of the study has been published in Lancet in December 2020. So that is why it carries a little more weightage and credibility in subscribing to this vaccine. So that is where the science is at. The other companies which are working on this viral vector is Chinese vaccine called CanSino Biologics are working on the viral vector vaccine, and this is still not out. They are in phase 2, and the Johnsons are working on viral vector vaccine, and this also has completed phase 3, which is from the Russia, which we call it as a Sputnik. It's come from Gamaleya National Center. Phase 3 is completed. So these are the only four vaccines at this point of time, as I'm giving this narrative on 5th December, have completed phase 3, which is Moderna, Pfizer, and this Oxford AstraZeneca, and the Russian one. So these are the vaccines which are being administered in the respective countries, and in India we have now availability of this Covishield, and possibly at any point of time this will be rolled out. So this is about viral vector. So in India, Covishield, what we are using is a viral vector, where the coronavirus gene is embedded into chimpanzee adenovirus, and that is used as a vector against which the body mounts the immune response. And if you want to correlate to the examples where viral vector vaccines has been previously used, it has been used in Ebola virus, it has been used in Zika virus, and some vaccines have been tried for dengue virus. So these are the historical perspective where viral vector has been used before. So then we have something called viral subunit vaccine. So viral subunit is where the proteins are extracted from this coronavirus, and then these proteins are constitute the part of the vaccine which is administered. So basically you extract the proteins from the virus and create a vaccine out of it and administer to an individual where he mounts an immune response to the protein. Ultimately, the subunit is the one against which predominantly your immune response develops, or your immunogenicity is indicated. So the countries which are predominantly working on this viral subunit are all the Scandinavian countries. The Swedish company Novavax is working on this viral subunit vaccine, and then you have a Danish company called AdaptVac company which is working on the viral subunit vaccine. Then you have this Chinese Clover Biopharmaceuticals which are working on viral subunit. And if you want to relate historically which are the conditions where viral subunit vaccine, it is used in herpes zoster and it has been used in hepatitis B. So this technology of viral subunit has been used in hepatitis B vaccine and herpes zoster. So this is your correlation as to where, but again these vaccines are not out, they are still undergoing experimental phases, and we would possibly have these vaccines coming out at some point of time. So this is a viral subunit. So right now what we have is only mRNA and viral vector vaccine. Okay. Then you have a live attenuated virus. So live attenuated, as the name sounds, so the virus virulence or the or the potency of the virus is weakened, and this is weakened by various methods. So the virus is alive, but it is rendered less infective, but it is having ability to mount a robust immune response from an individual. It's basically a live virus which is extremely weakened. I would call it as an imported virus which possibly cannot harm an individual, but body is able to mount an immune response to it. And the companies that are working on live attenuated is Codagenics company from USA, and it's a pride for our country, our Indian Immunologics, which is based out of Hyderabad. So they are also working on live attenuated virus. And this live attenuated vaccine for India, it is fairly common because polio is something which is a live attenuated vaccine, which obviously our country has used extensively, and chickenpox virus. So these are the two viruses where vaccines that have been used are the live attenuated weakened virus. So this is one category, and these are the two companies which are working on corona at this point of time. So Indian Immunologicals is one company, and we may come out with a vaccine in India. So that also is a good thing for our country. Then you have this inactivated virus. So this is another one which is obviously making a lot of news in India. Inactivated is where the virus is killed and it is inactivated by chemicals, heat or radiation, but it has an ability to mount a robust immune response from an individual against this. It's a dead virus, and body has an ability to identify the proteins and mount a response. It cannot replicate but can provoke a host immune response, and this is the Bharat Biotech or Covaxin, what we are calling. So this is obviously making a lot of news now, and I think we should be proud that India has put in a lot of technological expertise in coming out with this inactivated virus. So the other company that is coming is again a Chinese company. So as you see worldwide, there are not many companies which are working on inactivated. So it should be a proud moment for our country that we have come out with indigenous inactivated virus, and there's another Chinese called Sinopharm company which is working. So these are all the companies which are doing trials on inactivated virus. And the Bharat Biotech is Covaxin, and we'll talk about it. So historically, if you want to relate, inactivated virus has been used against polio virus. So this vaccine has been used against polio. So, and India has a very rich experience in dealing with polio vaccines. So attenuated vaccine and inactivated vaccine or inactivated virus vaccine has been used extensively in polio. So Indians possibly have better experience in coming out with vaccines, and we should trust Bharat Biotech because of our expertise in polio. So then you have this virus-like particle. So this is a unique thing. So there are no companies still who are come out working, but they are in a very nascent stages of coming out with this, where the virus-like particles are usually synthetically manufactured. So they try to mimic and try to produce a similar structural components of the virus, which is actually not a virus, and then but it has an ability to provoke immune response and come out with a host immune response. So it is synthetically manufactured simulated virus which can mount an immune response, and but as at this point of time there are no companies which have made headway in coming out with a vaccine from virus like particle. But there is something called split virus vaccine. As the name sounds, as you see, split virus vaccine, you see the virus which is completely split, which is split at multiple places. So the virus is basically broken down into multiple components, and these components can raise an immune response. And the historically where it has been used is the flu vaccines or the split vaccines, where virus is basically degraded, fragmented, and but they cannot cause the virulence or they cannot be potent enough to harm an individual, but they have an ability to mount a host immune response. This is called split virus vaccine, and even there are no companies which are working on this concept for coronavirus at this point, but they are in a early nascent experimental state to look at split virus vaccine. So then there's something called mRNA induced antibody. As the name sounds, so they extract the mRNA and they amplify this RNA, and they produce a vaccine with this RNA, and the antibodies are produced against this mRNA. It's called mRNA induced antibody. Even this technology is not being at this point of time utilized for coronavirus, but they are again in the very nascent experimental phase. So that is all about active immunity, and the passive immunity, which obviously now not many people would be interested now with vaccines coming out, is where you readily give antibodies to fight against the coronavirus. And obviously this predates our current scenario where vaccines are out. So where monoclonal antibodies is something they have considered, which is Bamlana, Bima, or polyclonal antibody Regeneron. I'm sure you have heard prior to this vaccine coming, some of the individuals in USA talking about Regeneron, which are ready-made antibodies which they put into the body to fight against this coronavirus. So this is passive immunity. And then we have spoken about convalescent plasma, which I'm sure many of you would have used to fight against this. So this is done and dusted. So what people are more worried and excited is all these vaccines. So let's talk about this would be possibly the last slide. Look at the risk, response, and ease of production of this. So, which is the virus, and what are the merits and demerits of all these different vaccines that are in pipeline? So, when you talk about nucleic acid DNA vaccine, so there is a risk of integration and mutation of the virus of the DNA vaccine. The response for the DNA vaccine is usually medium, and it is not easy to produce. So you need a special facility to produce DNA vaccine. So the RNA vaccine, as you see, the RNA vaccine produced by Moderna, it has not been used historically against any other pre-existing viruses like polio, measles, mumps. So this is a new technology where RNA is put into this lipid layer and then undergoes degradation, and then mRNA gets manifested, and then antibody response is raised against the spike protein. So it is considered safe. The immune response to this RNA vaccine is strong, and it is said it is fairly easy to produce this vaccine also. So the viral vector, which AstraZeneca, Oxford, or our Serum Institute is working, Covishield, again there is a risk of mutation in viral vector because you are using a chimpanzee adenovirus with all the viral components from the corona. So there is a risk of mutation, but the response is strong, and it is fairly easy to produce this vaccine also. So when we talk about live attenuated, so there is risk of infection because the virus is alive, and it can produce sometimes harm, but the response is very robust because it is the whole virus against which the body mounts immune response, and it is also easy to produce. So now we'll talk about Covaxin, which is an inactivated because the virus is virulence or the potency is reduced. It is considered safe, response is considered strong, and we should be proud again that it needs a special facility to produce these vaccines, which Bharat Biotech has able to produce. But I think the whole debate is about that it has not gone through phase 3. So uh, just to talk very briefly about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So the phase 1, when we say, it is mainly to look at the safety, about the side effects, and about whether it can cause any harm, because the tenets of our healthcare is cause do no harm, and it should be beneficial. So basically the phase 1 is only to look at whether it is safe, and it doesn't cause harm. So phase 2 is where you start looking at effectiveness of the vaccine, whether it is having good immunogenicity, whether it is able to get the immune response that you would desire to prevent an infection. So you would see in a group of people. Phase 3 is where you scale up the number of patients to attain statistical power and to prove statistically that the response that you have got, the effective response of preventing the infection is statistically significant. That is phase 3. So, right now, as we are talking on this, covaxin has gone through phase 2 and has shown that it is effective in protecting the individuals against the infection. But the reason why we are expecting phase 3 is to see whether it is statistically significant when compared with the placebo. That's all we are seeing. So, at this point of time, our message should be that this is safe, and this has an ability to raise a good immune response in preventing the infection. So the phase 3, which would come any time, is only to show that it is significantly, statistically showing that it is beneficial as compared to the placebo. I think this is what I could understand. So we don't have to make a huge fuss about phase 3, because what is most important is to ensure that it is absolutely safe, and the phase 2 also is important, where it tells that it is effective in protecting an individual from an infection by raising adequate immune response. Phase 3 is to look from the statistical standpoint that it has been significantly beneficial. So that is where we are at. So I would leave it at that for our audience or the listeners to take a, make conclusions or logical conclusion as to what they think is the right thing to do. Okay. And viral subunits is considered safe, response is strong, and it is easy to produce. So thank you very much. So I've dealt with this quote. So the whole movement of life is learning. So I know we are not experts in vaccine, but we are learning about it. So it's a new science, because we have stopped reading about vaccine as intensivists. We may not be relevant, but COVID has gotten us to learn. So the whole movement of life is learning. There is never a time in which there is no learning. Every action is a moment of learning, and every relationship is learning. So this was told by Jiddu Krishnamurti. So thank you all. So I will possibly cover about the studies of AstraZeneca, which came in Lancet, and maybe further things that come out about these vaccines in the next few parts. So this is just an overview, just to give a brief of what are the types of vaccine that are being developed worldwide, and what are out, and what are the merits of these vaccines. So thank you all.